Welcome to the Forging Honor podcast. I'm Jonathan George.
And I'm Benjamin Jones. Here at Forging Honor, we explore what it means to live as Christian men. Along the way, we'll be doing challenges, building habits and character through action.
In today's episode, Banjo and I interview Beck Oterson. We learn about his interest in the Old Testament, we hear about some tips for college students, and we get some practical advice for our own studies. All right, it is challenge check-in time. As a reminder, challenges last for 6 weeks. That's a total of 42 days. They are simple daily tasks to grow us as Christian men. The current challenge is to read or write something for at least 15 minutes every day. How are you doing on this, Banjo?
A little better than last week. I think last week I had dipped all the way down to a 3 out of 7. This week I think I'm back up to a 5 out of 7. Much more on the reading side of things, which has been good. And kind of like we talked about last time, taking more time to write in the margins of things and to be kind of more studious with note taking and that kind of thing. But my writing has really suffered. I'm not writing as much as I was before school started. And I thought I had set up a really good routine. I thought I was in a good spot going into the school year. But I really have tanked. I really have not just been able to kind of set aside the mental energy for writing this last couple of, this last week or two. So I'm trying to figure out how to get back in a rhythm with that and kind of get back in that creative zone. Just haven't been there. So that's me. How are you doing?
Not as well as I'd like. I'm still trending at the 4 out of 7. I can't remember what I said last week. It might have been 4, but 4 out of 7 for this week. And yeah, I did have one day of writing and the rest were reading. On the whole, though, I was happy with them. They were okay. I do feel like I think one thing that has suffered for me, especially in the last 2 weeks, has been I was on a really great roll for a while with kind of monotasking. Like we talked about a little bit before with our technology challenge, just trying to monotask life a little bit. And I was on a great roll with that, with the reading and the writing, and that's been that has not gone as well. I found I'm more easily distracted from my reading within the last week. I think part of that is I've allowed some responsibilities that I have to encroach on that time. I think this is something we might get into in our conversation today, but kind of figuring out how do you set aside that time properly. And I was setting aside well, kind of like you said, you thought you had great routines. But yeah, as the seasons change, life changes. So there's always has to be a renewed effort into that. With that being said, though, I'm excited. Banjo, would you introduce our guest?
Yes. So our guest today is Beck Oterson. He is currently pursuing a Ph.D. at Westminster Theological Seminary in Hermeneutics and Biblical Interpretation with a major in Old Testament. His dissertation investigates the nature of the Noahic Covenant and its place in the covenant theology of the Old Testament. He works part-time at Redeemer Orthodox Presbyterian Church in Danville, PA. Beck Oterson, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. It's good to be here and talk with y'all.
Yeah, excited to have you on. I get to know Beck a little bit. I got to know him over the last, couple of years now. As we go to the same church, and Beck is serving there as an intern part-time. He's a great preacher, or a exhortioner. I guess maybe it's the technical term from the pulpit. Also a great Sunday school teacher. He's been he's led 2 really good Sunday schools now. One on covenant theology, and he's going through the Westminster Larger Catechism right now in Sunday school. I have some questions. Maybe we can start with the catechism actually. But before we get there, I was wondering if you could tell folks a little bit more about about kind of where you are in the learning process and what you're working on with your dissertation.
Sure. Excuse me. So yeah, I am still in school because I don't want to grow up and get a real job and join the real world. No, not really. I'm still in school. I'm doing a PhD now. So this is my second time doing a graduate school thingy. So I went to college at the University of South Carolina and then made my way to Reformed Theological Seminary, where I did the Master of Divinity program. And now I'm at Westminster doing further studies until they tell me I can't go to school anymore. But I have always pretty much from the beginning of college, thought that I wanted to be involved in academics and teaching somehow. Before feeling the desire to do full-time ministry, I was more interested in science and STEM fields, but eventually, through long story short, ended up in the local church setting and in ministry and fell in love with that. And now hope to one day serve the church and also teach biblical studies, Christian theology, and help people understand particularly the Old Testament, the word of the Lord.
Why is that so important to you? What are some of those? It's really easy, I think, for us, at least in my mind, to fall into this. Like, okay, so I got to read up on Calvin, I got to read up on Bavinck, I got to read up on these guys, or if I'm not reading that, I better be checking up on my New Testament, my New Testament studies. Better get my Pauline letters down. Why is the Old Testament a place where we need to be spending time and study?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's one that, I think a lot of people today would say the Old Testament is not really important. There's actually been a famous book written recently called Unhitching from the Old Testament. And the idea that, we're New Testament Christians. Why do we need the Old Testament? It's got a bunch of crazy stuff in it. Pick any book of the Old Testament and you could find something, quote unquote, crazy in it. The two big reasons I think we need to read the Old Testament, there are tons of reasons, but the two big ones for me are, one, it was Jesus's Bible. Jesus didn't have the New Testament, but Jesus had the Old Testament, and Jesus read the Old Testament, and Jesus taught from the Old Testament. The New Testament writers as a whole quote from the Old Testament all over the place. I'm actually doing a project right now with some other folks, and we're looking at the New Testament's use of the Old Testament. So when does the New Testament quote or allude to the Old Testament? And there are literally thousands of places in the New Testament where it references the Old Testament. I think I counted it up, and on average, there are about 10 Old Testament quotations per chapter of the New Testament. I'm not sure if that's 100% accurate, but the point is, it's all over. So it's Jesus's Bible, and when Paul says all Scripture is breathed out by God, he was writing the New Testament, so he was actually talking about the Old Testament as being breathed out by God and profitable. So that's the first reason. And the second reason is because you kind of goes off of that. You can't really understand the New Testament fully unless you have the Old Testament. Of course, if you're a new Christian and you read the Gospel of John and you see, whoever believes in Jesus will be saved, that is easy enough for a child to understand with no background knowledge. However, what about passages like where it says, Jesus has come to fulfill the idea of a prophet, or Jesus is our priest, or even what is sin? All of those things are described in the Old Testament. And so in order to understand the New Testament, we need to first understand the Old Testament.
I like that. I like the emphasis on going back and understanding what came before, which kind of gets into our conversation a bit today. As folks know, we've been in a pattern of learning about a life of learning, trying to instill this as a habit as young men. And you have clearly desired that learning. As you said, you're doing it until they kick you out, which is a fun perspective to have. I don't think a lot of people have that perspective. They're trying to get out as much as they can, which I think is sad. So I would love to know a little bit about what instilled that love in you early. What caused you to want to pursue that? To even give you that interest in something. Like you can say, oh, here's why we should learn about the Old Testament. But like for you personally, what helps to drive that? And maybe there's something we can learn from that.
Yeah, I think a few factors from an early age instilled my love of learning. One would definitely be my mother. My mother was a career public school teacher. She taught elementary school. And now she's retired, but she still actually works at the front desk of the elementary school where she taught for along all of my life, basically. And so she, of course, just being around an educator, you're always around school, always around learning. And she, neither of my parents are, you would say, stereotypically, quote unquote, nerdy or things like that. But they're both very smart people, and they're both very thoughtful people. And so they always encouraged my sister and I to be thoughtful and to think about things carefully and to approach life in a thoughtful manner, which I think is really just kind of foundational underneath the idea of learning is being a thoughtful person in the world, and a thoughtful Christian. And then another thing, the second thing I think is, as I went through school, I was blessed to have really amazing teachers who were not only smart and good educators, but really passionate about their subjects. And they were able to communicate to me the excitement, kind of the X factor of things like history or literature, or even subjects that I didn't really enjoy or do as well at, like chemistry or physics, were not my best subjects. You could ask my mother or my teachers. But I had really great teachers who loved their subjects and helped me see why they're important by doing things like, when you're in a history class talking about this is where we come from, learning about, for example, the Civil War, growing up in North and then South Carolina, that history still shapes our states today, or growing up as a United States citizen and learning about the late 20th century and how the United States kind of came onto the world stage post World War II, or physics, learning about, I wear glasses. And so it's really interesting to learn about the fact that a lens reflects light in a certain way. And because of that, I can see now, whereas I wouldn't be able to drive a car without any of that stuff. And so just my teachers instilled that passion and that curiosity and kind of that X factor. And so really those people, I think, pushed me in the direction.
Can you think of a moment in that education process where something clicked, where you kind of went from maybe I'm not interested in this, I don't get it, to that's why that's beautiful? Can you think of anything where that and how did the teacher kind of got you into that? Just thinking as a teacher myself, I'd love to bring that to a student.
Yeah, that's for all of us who teach. That's how do you get what you're excited about to get these kids, or for I do more adult education, but how do you get these adults to be passionate about it? I think the classes and teachers that impacted me most in seminary, but also before seminary, are those classes that were kind of on the teacher's thing, their expertise. So, for example, in high school, I had a teacher named Mr. Quinn, who taught history of the Americas. And that was kind of his class. He taught several history classes, but history of the Americas was like his baby. Or in seminary, I took a course on the origin and authority of the New Testament canon from a professor named Dr. Michael Kruger. And that was an elective that he created. He wrote the book for it, and that was his area. He did his dissertation on canon stuff and research his canon stuff. And so taking classes like that, where some of the best advice I got going into seminary and college was you have to take required courses, of course, but sign up for professors before you sign up for courses. So, for example, if you're doing electives, say there's an elective that looks really neat, and then there's one you don't know about the topic, but you've met the professor before and you want to learn from him. He's, a pastor you respect. He's a theologian you respect. He's a writer you respect. Because I think what happens in the classroom is the X factor is the thing that's caught rather than taught. So anybody could teach you, the basics of mathematics, but the excitement and the passion is going to be caught, and that takes those of us who teach to be passionate about our subjects, whether that's literature or the scriptures, to first ourselves go deep and for ourselves try to find why does this matter? Why should I get up in the morning and tell people about this subject?
I love that idea of the sign up for professors before you sign up for classes. I can think of at least one time in college where I did that backwards, and I can think of at least one time where I did it that way, and be like, oh, this is not what I thought it was. I thought that I was going to get a lot more out of it. And all of the professors at Covenant were great, but I can just think of a few times, or I had one class where the same material was being taught, but everyone wanted to be in the one class, and it was because of the professor. So that's really cool. I'm curious, is there a way that we can do that in life where we don't get to sign up on syllabus day or whatever? There's no dean I can go talk to. But what's the real life version of that? How do I go find my professors instead of my courses?
That's a great question. And the first thing that comes to my mind is something I've thought about recently, and I've heard one or two other smarter people than I talk about it. But I think it's relevant to learning, and it's the importance of friendship, and friendship with peers, and also friendships with people who are younger than you, and friendships with people who are older than you. And I think it's really important. I understand y'all are talking about being Christian men, and to be in the church and to find a man who is not just a little older than you, but who's a chapter or two ahead of you, who's got several more miles on him, and can help you walk the Christian life. And that can be a hard thing to do. That's why it's important to be in a church and make sure you have good elders and all of that stuff. But to start to over time build a relationship with someone like that, and it'll take years. That's not a short project you can get done by Christmas. But if you start the slow work of building a relationship with mentors, if possible, I think it's good also for that to be with your parents. I understand a lot of people do have hard relationship with their parents, and parents might not be Christian if you're a Christian, and there's other factors there too. But parents or elders in your church or somebody in life who can help you walk that road, just like Timothy did. Timothy and Paul, a father in the faith, is really important.
It's really great advice. It echoes back Banjo to, I think was it Dave Raymond when he had him on, just talking about earlier in this challenge, in this series. That was his final piece of advice was, yes, find someone you can work with, work alongside. Do you have specific advice surrounding that? And do you have specific people in your, or living or dead in a sense that could be mentors on that front?
I will start with dead, because I have my bookshelves around me. I got some advice after seminary from one of my living mentors, and he said, pick a theologian, somebody who has written a lot and who is like well-known and good, and read over the next 10 years everything they've written and just dive into that theologian. And I so far have picked, I've picked two, and I haven't really decided because I'm still young, so I can be ambitious. But I've picked Augustine and Calvin, who are kind of like, they're not
kind of lightweights, right?
Yeah,
kind of
not too much to
middle of the
figure
pack
out there.
guys.
Yeah. No, they don't have. Neither of them wrote a whole lot of stuff. They're not. No. I mean, in one sense, they're very vanilla. It's like Augustine and Calvin. Who else would you pick? But one reason I picked them is because when I read them in seminary, I did actually like them and enjoy what I read. But because they're so influential and so profound, their influence has been so profound. I thought, it's important not just to read people who are influenced by Augustine and Calvin, but to go ad fontes, back to the primary sources, and see why are these the big names. So those are two I've read. I think that's good advice. Find, a John Owen, a John Calvin, a Herman Bavinck, a C.S. Lewis, if you're a literary guy, an E.B. White or a Tolkien. There are myriad people out there, and they're just human beings, so you can pick whoever and don't worship them, but it's just a human being, so you can pick whoever you're interested in, and if you don't like it, then pick a new one next year.
That's sorry to interrupt, but that's a key point though. Pick somebody, but they're human. Don't worship them. Just real quick, how do you know if you're sliding too far in that direction? One,
two good barometers. One is really more of a rhetorical hyperbole than anything else. But are you reading more of the Bible than you're reading about the Bible? That can be hard if you're like me and your day job is to read books other than the Bible. I probably do read more about the Bible than I read actually the Bible, because I have to. I'm a writer and a reader and a student. But the principle holds. What is the man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of, not Augustine, not John Calvin, but God. So is that where you're getting your spiritual life? Is from the Word. And then secondly, do you ever disagree with them? Right now, Banjo knows I'm doing a series in the Psalms when I'm in the pulpit. And so I've been enjoying both Calvin and Augustine's commentaries on the Psalms. And there are points where I disagree with them. And that's not bad. They're both smarter than me, and I'm probably wrong a bunch of the times. But, when I preach on the Psalms, is it me summarizing Augustine, or are they helping me understand the Word, or helping me understand something about the Christian life, or am I just conforming to the image of Augustine? So it is a hard line, but it's just that spiritual work of Jesus first through the Word.
That's super helpful. Sorry, I cut you off.
I have
JJ,
a question. It's very important.
You had another question.
Yes.
I saw it in your eyes.
Well, you mentioned
the
fact that reading is your day job, and what you do right now. You're setting out to learn daily with a long-term purpose. Do you have kind of side learning projects? Do you have things that you do that you're not being told to do by professors, that you do purely for the love of them?
I do. Not many right now. Just the nature of being a PhD student, you really have to whittle down your hobbies. But a couple, I do write my own fun things on very occasionally. I don't know how many of them have made it to the internet. Westminster Seminary has a magazine. I know a couple of the folks who edit for that. I've submitted one or two things to them. I am working on a couple of research projects with other students. So one I mentioned, New Testament use of the Old Testament. That's not directly related to school. I'm not getting a grade for that. That's just a research project. Doing one on, potentially talking with someone about doing one on covenant theology. Republishing an old book that has not been published in a couple hundred years. And because I'm in academic circles, those are the kinds of things I do.
Absolutely. It's good to hear. And I know it would be important to maintain those things. I think so that you don't lose that love of learning, because I know, at least for myself, there were periods of time in my education, which is much shorter than yours. But periods of time where all I wanted to do was stop with the education and just go do anything else. And maybe that's a fine thing. I don't know. But when you experience those times, it sounds like, one, you do have some other fallback hobbies that are also that kind of steer you back in that direction. Some of these research projects. But do you ever get to that point where you're just, I'm done. I want to block all the learning, all the reading, all the writing. What do you do in those moments, and how do you get yourself back on track?
Yeah, that's a great question. Not just for school, but also for work. Whether you're in a kind of academic career or something else like a business career, or life. I definitely I hit a moment like that this last semester. So in the spring, I just finished what are called comprehensive exams. It's kind of the culmination of your coursework in the PhD program, and they're exactly what they sound like. Any PhD program in the United States would have comprehensive exams, which are exams that are on everything. And they're, 2-3 days. You study forever and they're terrible. And you get through the end and you're like, oh, I never wanna, I'm done with these are like the hardest tests I've ever taken. All my hair fell out. I feel like I'm 11 years older, like the before and after pictures of former President Obama. That's like, we would text those around like before and after comps. So what do you do? I think a couple things, maybe three things. The first thing I would say is, even before you get there, or while you're in those seasons, the importance for Christians especially, of rest, and for us the Lord's Day. However wherever you fall on the Sabbath stuff, I think definitely making sure that the Lord's Day, you're in the Lord's house with his people. And I personally don't do any, no matter what is going on at school. I will not do school on the Lord's Day. It's time to be with my wife. It's time to be with people at church. Even if I have a big exam Monday morning, I'll wake up early Monday morning and study. And it's just a good practice of rest, one that's kind of built into the week there. And then secondly, I think it's important to have, kind of like we were talking about, a couple of different things. So for example, studying for comps, that was like basically 99% of my time was studying for comps. But, I had, in the spring, I read through the Narnia books because I really love Narnia, and you can blast through one of those books and not really have to think too hard if you don't want to. It's not very taxing on the brain. Or, Ben and I are doing a race, and so I started training for the race back in the spring. So, go for a run, do something, exercise, something that's not working your brain. So have something that you can take a break while you're in the middle of it. And then I don't know if I was going to say two or three things. I think I said three things, but I could only think of two things to say. So.
Well, that's good. So at some point I want to ask you about, I think there's something about the race and education, both of those things together, I want to ask you about. Before I ask you that, though, you've gone through, because just to clarify, Beck and I are in the same half marathon this Saturday. So if you guys think of us, you can pray that we survive, because we're going to be lost in the mountains. It's 3,000 feet of elevation. One of us is going to blow a hammy, and it's probably going to be me.
That's right now that I'll be talking to Beck from here on out, and not Banjo.
I'm getting replaced. But I wanted to ask, so you've been in education for, many, many years now, in terms of you've gone through the elementary, middle school, high school, college, graduate, doctorate, all this. What's it like getting to look back over that and to see the way that you've changed as a learner, to see that you've changed as a student? How do you think about education differently now than you did in maybe high school or even college? Do you think you're a better learner now? Do you have systems that you think are more effective?
That's a good question. I haven't really thought about that much. I think looking back, on one hand, there are things I'm better at now. So one thing you learn in the Ph.D. program that is kind of a weird skill that you don't really need in the real world is I could digest a book in an afternoon. Did not mean read every word that's not what I mean. But for my research, if there's a new book on the market, an academic book, there's a couple here on my desk. You just learn how to use a book to get the main idea, a couple of the main arguments. And so if you need to consult it later, you know where to go. Or I just know how to crank out a paper. I think it was last Monday, I cranked out a little 5,000 word piece and sent that off. It was on a topic I'm pretty familiar with. So you just but that's but then when it's budget season, so every month we do the budget, and you can imagine I don't make a ton of money, so I don't have many lines on my budget. That is not a 30-second project for me. So you learn particular skills like that, how to read, how to write, and how to research, how to real quickly go do that. But on the other hand, there are things that really haven't changed. And it was really starting in high school, the very basic study habits I learned. And of course you get better over time, but I think it's that foundation that lets you get kind of to the PhD level. If you get to the PhD level and you don't have, basic study habits down, it's going to hurt. It's just going to hurt. Just kind of like if you're going to run a half marathon, but you don't know the basics of long run, rest days, et cetera, it's going to be brutal.
It's going to hurt. Yeah. Yeah. I hear you on that one. Which is, I
can see the misery in your eyes right now.
I can already feel
I know it's there.
Up.
I hear it in your voice. Yeah, it's not good.
Sorry, I hate to bring this up, but it's going to be raining too. I think I've got a bad feeling about the weather.
It's going to be raining.
Anyway,
oh boy,
it looks bad. Yeah. That's all I'm saying.
Yes.
Sorry, JJ, go ahead.
In your process of establishing those habits, are there some core essential habits that you would argue everyone should be able to practice when it comes to learning whatever it is they want to learn?
That's a great question. I think the first thing is scheduling. So I use Google calendars, but I also have I like buy a paper calendar from Amazon. And every Monday, the first thing I do on Monday morning after I, wake up, drink my coffee and all that is plan my schedule for the week, and plan not just like, okay, I've got these meetings, I've got, I'm teaching this Bible study or et cetera, but put in blocks for study time. And you might have seen that there's an old video that, if you have a jar and you've got big rocks, little rocks, and then sand, and if you try to fit everything in there, if you put the sand in first and then the medium rocks, then all the big rocks don't fit. You've always got to start with the big rocks, and then the sand will fill in the gaps. I think that's really the first step, is planning time to study, treating it like, if you're training for a race, you're going to say, okay, I'm blocking off from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. after work to run. Or if you're, dating a girl or building a relationship with a new friend, you're going to say, okay, on Thursday nights, I'm going to do this with my friends. And you plan for it. Learning is the same way. If you don't plan for it, it's just not going to happen. So planning for it. And then when you're there, when you're at your desk doing your learning, not being distracted is really important. So if I have to get if I'm working on my dissertation and I have a due date for a chapter, whatever, I need to get to my advisor, I'll use the do not disturb on my phone and computer and just turn off notifications. So my wife can reach me, but that's it. No other notifications will come through. And I have this desk here where I'm facing the window. Sometimes I'll close the blinds on the window. It's just my books. It's just the desk. There's no, I'll close the door. There are no TVs or distracting things like that in here. It feels like an office space, which are little things, but it's so easy, especially if you work from home, to, I got to go do the laundry. I forgot to clean out the coffee pot. And then thing after thing, it's an hour later and you haven't done any learning.
Do you listen to music or is it you need a silent space?
I am not a listener to music. My wife and I are actually very different in this regard. So in college, my wife and I both went to the University of South Carolina. And in the big library in the basement, they had these study carols. They were amazing. It was totally silent. And you would go in and it's like I don't know how to describe it other than like a bathroom stall, except it's not a bathroom. It's just like a study carol. And you lock the door and it's like, it's like quieter than a graveyard. And she hated it. She could not go down there and study. I could not study anywhere else. I can't do the coffee shop studying. I can't listen to music while I'm studying. I have to have no distractions. So that might be, I don't know if that's a neurosis of mine, but
well, it's probably healthy. I used to be at a place where I could have a movie on in the background and study, and I actually needed it because it wasn't a movie that I would love or care about. I put on like a kung fu movie, and I would do my study for a test because I just needed some white noise, and I needed something that allowed me to not have the anxiety of I have to study for this test now, and that was a release valve. But as I get older, it's the room has to be silent, nobody can be around, and I'm eschewing music too at this point. Little different skill set that I wanted to ask you about. You have a really great talent, Beck, for as someone has gotten to hear your exhorting and your Sunday school teaching. You're really, really good at taking a really heavy, really complicated concept and then repackaging it for people who don't have your level of education. How do you do that? What's the process of taking something that takes years to learn and then presenting in the way that anybody can pick up. It's a real sleight of hand trick.
Well, that's kind of you to say, because in a lot of ways I feel like I'm still learning on that front myself. I got some advice from one of my old preachers. We were talking one time about preaching, and he said, don't strive to be exciting. Don't strive to be passionate. Strive to be clear. Just have the fundamental assumption that you're a horrible writer, that you are terrible at preaching, and that the people listening to you don't read, don't care about what you have to say, and don't know anything that you're talking about. And he was a very passionate man. He was very hyperbolic, as you can tell from his advice. But that's really when I sit down to write, whether it's a little blog article or a chapter or a sermon, Sunday school, whatever it is, clarity is the goal. And part of that, you mentioned things that take years to learn. Part of that is I'm now in my 5th plus year of graduate theological education. So I have been studying things like the catechism for a few years now. But also it's that ruthless practice of being clear and that part of that takes being with community. Some of it is I've been up front a lot, and so I've had feedback from different people. But write it and then have a day later where you come back to it and read it again and see, does this make sense? Or if you're married, give it to your spouse and ask, does this make sense? Or one thing I've done at my previous church, we did a lot of children's sermons, and I did a youth Bible study, and so I'm kind of used to talking to people who are definitely not at the Ph.D. or even at the college undergraduate level. So those kind of just practices of make clarity the goal, and then be ruthless about your clarity.
Talking about educational tools like that, first off, that's try to be clear advice. That is so good.
Incredible.
I've got to get that like tattooed on. I was gonna say my forehead, but then I wouldn't see it very often. So like the back of my hand or something. That's so good. But in terms of clarity, a great model for that is the catechism that we've been going through in Sunday school. I'm wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about what's the value, what's the intent of something like a catechism tool, what's the value of it for those who may not know about it or be new to the Reformed world somewhat. What is the Westminster Catechism, and why is it a good educational tool for us to use?
Sure. Yeah. And just one more thing on that clarity that's a little less kind of beat you over the head. After he told us to strive for clarity and just assume you're a terrible preacher and the people listening to you don't know anything and don't care about what you're saying, he said, if you're clear, then the passion and the excitement will come. If you're clear on your topic and what you're speaking about, if you're speaking about the Bible, or if you're clear on a piece of literature, or if you're clear on the quadratic equation, or whatever you're speaking or teaching about, it will be exciting because you've done that work to really grasp what it is. The catechism, like you said, is so I'll explain what it is. That we have what are called the Westminster Standards, which for churches like the PCA, the OPC, the ARP, are our confession of faith. It's a summary statement of what we believe about the Bible. And the Westminster Standards were written in the 1640s in England by a group of ministers, a little over 100. I think I should remember how many delegates there were. I don't remember, 112 or maybe. Yeah, probably about 112 ministers getting together to write these documents. And the Westminster Standards are made up of 3 documents. The Confession, which is just a 32-chapter little pamphlet, 32 topics. The Shorter Catechism and the Larger Catechism. Not, by the way, this is partly a joke, but also something I've actually thought and tried to research. Not the shorter and longer, and not the smaller and larger, but the shorter and larger catechisms. I don't know. That one escapes me. But the shorter and the larger catechism.
So precise in their language. There has to be a reason. We're going to have to figure that out.
Yeah. I actually have talked to. So I took a class on the standards with a professor named Chad Van Dixhorn, who is a one of the leading experts on the confession and the standards in the Westminster Assembly, and he actually is the one who mentioned that in class to us, and it's bugged me ever since he mentioned it. But the catechisms, the shorter and the larger, are both a series of questions and answers. Catechism is just from a Greek word katecheo. We use the word to catechize, to teach. A catechism is a series of questions and answers. In the shorter catechism, you have 107 questions. In the larger, you have 196 questions. And they're just short summaries of the Christian faith. So, for example, what is God? How many persons are there in the Godhead? What is justification? Things like that. And I think the catechisms are very valuable. The larger catechism especially. I mean, the shorter catechism is frankly easier to memorize. I know of like 2 people who've memorized the larger catechism, but they're monsters. I don't know any normal people who can memorize the larger catechism. The shorter catechism is great for its concision. The larger catechism has some wonderful questions that are just very helpful for thinking about Christianity and the Christian life, partly because they're short, helpful summaries, biblical summaries of what the Bible teaches about important things, like what is God, what is the chief end of man, what is justification. But there are also some questions that are like questions that you get or you ask as a pastor or as a Christian. Like there's a question in the catechism on what's the difference between justification and sanctification. There's actually a biblical or a confessional answer to that. Or a question, can those who've never heard the gospel be saved? There's actually a question in the larger catechism. Questions in the larger catechism like, what is required of them that hear the word preached? So, in other words, how do you listen to a sermon? Questions like that in the catechism that summarize biblical teaching on these really important and practical topics. And it's a great tool for discipleship, partly because it has stood the test of time, and it's also a group document. So it's not just like your favorite devotional book, but it was a group of over 100 trained theologians who wrote it, and then it has been affirmed by hundreds of thousands of Christians for hundreds of years, and so it's got that extra gumption behind it.
Yeah, that's helpful. A helpful summary. It leads me to another question, and this is probably my last serious question before I like to ask my last couple questions. I like to go left field as much as I can, so we'll get there in a second. Of course, JJ, I'm sure, has some last questions. I know one of them because it's a good one. But I wanted to ask, talking about it, the catechism as a devotional material there. Is there a difference? This is maybe too nitty gritty, too practical. But is there a real difference between like devotional material and educational material? Do you approach something, if you're saying this is going to be part of like a devotion, is that significantly different from education?
That's a good question. I have never really intended to use those words in like a technical sense. I think when normal Christians talk about your devotional time, you're thinking about that time in the morning where you read your Bible and you feel warm fuzzies about Jesus. And education, we think about like going to Sunday school and trying to figure out what the Trinity is all about. So that's just, frankly, that's how people normally use the word. When I think about the spiritual discipline of being in the Word and letting the Word of Christ dwell in you richly, part of it is the warm fuzzy, but part of it is also loving the Lord your God with all of your mind. And so for me, remember back to what I said, read more about the Bible, read more of the Bible than you read about the Bible. Don't replace the Bible with the catechism. But if you get an addition with scripture proof texts, I found it a really helpful thing to, maybe after your Bible reading, to go look at a question and then look at the proof text and be like, how did they get this from the Bible? And is this a faithful summary of the Bible? How would I say it, if I was asked this question? So I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. JJ, you got some last questions in the hopper?
Looking at my notes, I'm wanting to get back to some of the question about rest and Sabbath and putting aside time for rest and Sabbath. And you mentioned specifically that you don't do school on those days. And this kind of dovetails a little bit off of that devotion question, though, is what is the appropriate place for learning on the Sabbath, in your opinion? I know folks have different opinions. But what kind of pursuits at that intellectual level would you pursue?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, it is a little strange for me to not do school on Sabbath because my school is the Bible. I'm doing a degree in the Bible, but I do read the Bible on the Lord's Day. One thing I have, when I think about the Sabbath or try to help people, understand just basic, what do I do on Sundays? Corporate worship. If you can, morning and evening. If your church does something in the evening, that's always good to bookend your day with being with the Lord's people. That communion of the saints is important. And in the middle, fill it up with fellowship with other Christians, times with prayer, fellowship with your family. And if you don't, a lot of folks don't have a job like mine. In a lot of ways, it's a privilege to be in ministry and to have my job to study the Bible. But I think Sunday is a great day if you don't really read many Christian books, or you don't have a lot of time to study the Bible. Sunday is a great day to do that, to dig into the Bible, to dig into a theology book, to dig into a catechism or confession, or a book about marriage, or if there's an issue that you or your friends or have been thinking about or turning over, to dig into it that way. I think all of that is appropriate on the Sabbath, or even people would differ with this. I think it's okay, like fiction or poetry, to think about beauty and things like that. When I say I don't do school, I mean more of I don't work on assignments on the Lord's Day, just because it's good for me to have a break and realize that school is not all of life. But I do enjoy reading theology or devotional material. I've been reading recently through some Puritan works on the Sabbath, which have been really fun.
It's good stuff. All right, so I like to close out my question asking time with more of the left field side of things. So I know you a little bit, Beck. So I'm going to ask this question. I think you've shown over the last hour or so that you're a man of intellect, a man of character and class. What is it about a movie like Caddyshack that speaks to your soul? And how does one? How does that bring out the finer bits of why should young men go watch Caddyshack? I speak as one who's a great fan, and maybe do you have a favorite line that you could share with us?
Yeah, because I do work in the ministry, I do have to say, depending on how young you are as a man, I cannot recommend you to go watch Caddyshack.
That's a good rule.
Yeah. Yeah. What is it? I think I love humor. I love comedy. I love funny movies. And I think Caddyshack, movies like that are very dry. I think I would describe them as, it's a little different than like Dumb and Dumber. There are a couple characters in Caddyshack who are kind of over the top. One of my favorite lines is when Rodney Dangerfield's character, he's in the golf shop, the pro shop, and he sees this hat that's just like kind of, I don't know what it is about the hat. I don't even know what this means.
It's so colorful and it's over the top.
Yeah. And he goes, "Oh, you buy a hat like that, y'all get a free bowl of soup." And I don't know what that means, but he turns around and the owner of the club is standing there and he sees him and goes, "Oh, looks good on you though." And then does just the most massive Rodney Dangerfield eye roll that you ever saw.
It's beautiful.
But, I think there's something about humor and comedy, the unexpected. It's a very witty movie. It's the conversations are always fast paced. The characters go back and forth real quick. I just find that fun.
You grew up on a lot of British humor too, right? That was also in your wheelhouse?
I did somehow. I don't know how. British humor, and also like Abbott and Costello, like from the way back.
Who's on First and all that good stuff.
Who's on First is a good one. There's a good one where they do they owe rent, and they owe 13 weeks of $7, and so they do 7 times 13 is, and they only have $28, so they show 7 times 13 is 28. Yeah, I don't know how I got into stuff like that, but
it's so good. Well, I mean, talking about the half marathon stuff, Beck and I will run together sometimes with one of the other elders at our church, and oh my gosh, at like mile 7 on a 10-mile run, Beck will just say something, and I can't finish the mile because I'm laughing so hard. And I don't know if people know this, but you can't actually laugh and run at the same time. It's a very difficult thing to do. JJ knows this. JJ, I was thinking of you yesterday because I went on a run in the cold rain, and I remember that one run that we had where we both had frostbitten hands.
I think I had
Lookout
some
Mountain.
icicles in my then beard. I no longer have the beard because it attracts icicles.
It was a good run. I got one
you
more.
Go for it, Banjo.
You want to go last, or you want me to go last? Well, it's on the similar topic. In these long runs, as you're thinking about the half marathon this weekend, what do you think about on these long runs, on these long races? Are you using it to chew on a big theological topic, or are you just kind of like? I remember one time I thought, do penguins have kneecaps? And that was my big thought for the run. Which one of those is more your style?
I can't say I've ever wondered about the anatomy of a penguin's knee, but now I probably will. That's probably going to keep me up tonight. Is wondering whether or not penguins have kneecaps. What do I think about? Sometimes I like to run without any music or anything, and really just not think about anything. Sometimes it is nice to turn your brain off. I know we're thinking about learning, but part of that is giving your mind space to rest and just to kind of come back. And so sometimes it's nice just to go out into the woods when I'm by myself and just have a quiet run and to enjoy the stillness. Sometimes I'll especially if I'm preaching on Sunday, I'll pray on the run or think about different people in the congregation and how this text might apply to them. And that's kind of where I work through some of those things. Sometimes I'll use that time to listen to a podcast, or if there's new music out that I want to listen to. A run's a great time to do new podcasts. Frankly, if it's anything over 10 miles, for like the first 8 miles, I'm normally engaged thinking about something with my mind, and then the rest of it is just, why did I ever do this? Whoever invented running? This is the worst thing I've ever thought of. All of my muscles hurt. I didn't know I had these muscles. I'm never running again.
I know that feeling all too well. I'm never running again feeling. And I've lied to myself every time. And and then I find myself and I promise myself again, I'm never running again. Well, anyway, so I don't know how to segue into my last question, but for young men, especially young Christian men who are excited about a life of learning, who are excited about some of the stuff we're talking about, what would you tell them to do tomorrow?
That's a great question. What can you do tomorrow? I think 2 things. The first thing is something you can do yourself is to pick a book on something you're interested in, whether it's by an author you like or on a topic you like, and just start reading it. You have to start somewhere. And I say book intentionally because today a lot of people do their thinking on the internet, which was not really designed for critical thinking. There is helpful stuff on the internet. I've put stuff out on the internet that I think is helpful. There are great resources on the internet, but there is something different about getting a book that has been gone through editing and publishing by someone who has worked on this project, for a year plus to produce this book, whatever it is. So get a book and just read a little bit of it. And, when you get a book like that, you don't have to finish it if you don't like it, or if only the first half is helpful, then just read the first half. But do something. And then the second thing is reach out to somebody, I think the best thing would be an older man and just start that conversation of, it might be a simple thing as, hey, I'd love to get coffee and just talk, just get to know you, hear your story. Or if it's somebody you know already, say, hey, I've been thinking about this. I'd love to have a conversation about it. Or have you read anything or heard anything on this that's helpful? And start that conversation with other people. I think learning, a lot of learning happens in community. And so get a book and then get a friend.
Well, it's been great, Beck. Thanks so much for coming on. If anybody wants to go out and find some of the stuff that you've written or gotten published, is there a spot they can go find that?
Oh, that's a good question. Maybe in the Westminster Magazine, but I think when I've done book reviews, they've been for like the Westminster Journal, which is a subscription thing. I don't know if things I preach or sometimes they're put on the internet. I don't touch that with a 9.5-foot pole. I let the audio guys, if they put it on the internet. So.
Sounds good. We'll point folks in that direction. But thanks so much for coming on. This has been great.
Yeah, it's good to talk to you all. Good to see you and good to meet you, JJ.
You as well. Thank you.
This has been the Forging Honor podcast. Music and production is by Elliot George. For more information about what we do or to learn how to get involved, visit our website at forginghonor.com. There you'll find information about our community, the Forge, and how to join other young men seeking to glorify God in thought, word, and deed. You'll also find blog articles, book recommendations, and more ways to grow as a Christian man.
If you enjoyed the show, please tell a friend or family member about Forging Honor. We would also appreciate it if you would take a moment to like and subscribe. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, a rating and review only takes a moment, and it goes a long way towards growing the Forging Honor community.
Thanks for taking the time with us today. We hope you'll take up the work alongside us and join us in the task of forging honor. We'll see you next time.